Welcome to Football Geeks, the podcast. My guest this week is a writer and podcaster of renown and a regular scribe for Middlesbrough FC's magazine and a contributor to the club podcast. He's also a massive football kit enthusiast, which is where our paths crossed during our time writing, editing and podcasting for Kit magazine a few years ago. But his most recent venture has seen him transcend the 3,000 word count limitations of magazine writing to complete his first book, which profiles football's emergence from the pre-Sky era into the bright new gilded world of modern football. So 1992, the birth of modern football follows football's transition from the unmoneyed pre-Sky era through to the advent of Sky, exploring everything from the Champions League, Italian football, the pass-back rule, and the incongruous rubbishness of the England national team. It's an absolutely cracking read for anyone with an interest in football and its progression from working class sport into big business. It gives me enormous pleasure to welcome the wonderful Rob Fletcher. Rob, how are you, mate?
Hi, Phil. That's a very long and intro there. I felt almost important. And I'm really happy to be on and really excited to be chatting about the book as well.
Oh, excellent. Well, as I say, I've read it. It is excellent. You've done a cracking job. So congratulations. I'm not just blowing smoke there. It's a great piece of work, mate. Yes. So now I know that you've had recent heartbreaks as a Middlesbrough fan. And they're probably still causing you pain, but we'll revisit that at the end. We've talked about this before. We're going to do a little bit on their worst games ever at the end. So I'm going to sidestep that for the time being and jump straight into the book. So 1992, the birth of modern football. A great subject for discussion. And what a year, mate. But how did you select this period of transitional change as the subject for your first book?
Yeah, it was interesting, actually. So I think you alluded it to a little bit in the introduction. So during lockdown, I was reading These Football Times magazine. And I live in Liverpool now, and they had the Liverpool edition had just come out. And I was saying to myself, God, wouldn't it be great if Borough had one of these issues? And I thought, no one's ever going to write a magazine like this about Middlesbrough. So I kind of set it up myself, really. So I knew a few people on social media who'd written about Borough, like fan blogs, who'd written for fanzines and stuff like that. So I got a few of them together and we put this magazine together. But my article I did about 92-93, first Premier League season, but about Borough and what it was like for the club being part of that. Very different to if we got promoted now, but still a big thing to be part of this new league. So I think around that time, I started to think about other things that had happened in that year. And I kind of found out more about it as I was reading stuff, because as a football fan, I knew about football at that time. And I had a few football kits and I'd been to a couple of matches, but I didn't really know that much about football then. I was more like about 94, like the World Cup in USA was about my time. So as I started to research more, I found that there was quite a lot out there in very different places. So someone had done something about the Premier League, someone had done something separate about the Champions League and the back pass show. And I thought, there hasn't been anything that's kind of brought all that together and sort of used that as a line in the sand. Because my generation of fans, we are like post-92 fans. Because, if you've grown up with that type of football, the Premier League, the Champions League, you just naturally in that world. And I think it was quite good looking back at how did that actually happen and why did it actually happen and what was sort of the driving forces behind it, really.
Yeah. I mean, I must say I've spent most of my time in the modern football world, but I lived most of my time in the time prior to that. Yeah. For me, it feels like 1990 was about 3 or 4 years ago. It is, in fact, a long, long time ago. So can you talk us through the period immediately prior to 1992? What did the football landscape look like back then?
I think it was quite interesting because there's quite a few people who've talked about Italia 90 being a bit of a line in the sand, especially in English football. So I think looking at that in particular, seeing all the fans greeting all of the players getting off the plane after they'd finished sort of top 4 in a World Cup. There'd been Gascoigne, there'd been New Order, a World in Motion. It kind of felt like a team that you could get behind, even though when you look back at it, it wasn't the best football in the world. It was just some great results, some dramatic results, extra time winners. But in the group stage, England weren't great. They had, I think, a couple of draws and a win, didn't they, to get out of the group?
Yeah, they drew with Ireland and Holland and then scraped through with a 1-0 against Egypt in the final game.
Imagine that now. Imagine like in the modern era, Gareth Southgate had 2 draws and a win to get out of a group. He'd be pilloried from in all the national newspapers, but it was a bit different. I think before that, the decade preceding that in the 80s is probably one of the most challenging periods for football generally. I think there's a lot made of the hooliganism that was rife in the game, and it was rife. That doesn't mean to say people couldn't go to a football match and enjoy it. It just means that there was a slightly different edge to some of the tribalism, I think, that we see online now. It was a little bit more physical tribalism in certain games, in certain circumstances. And I know that as a Borough fan, I know that there was quite a lot of Borough fans who used to travel the country, and, there was trouble caused, and there was probably the same for every club. But I think that decade in England, because of the European football ban, our football changed quite a bit. They made new competitions to fill that gap. We weren't necessarily attracting the players that we possibly could have attracted. You've got people moving abroad because of that. You've got Venables in Barcelona, Lineker, Howard Kendall moves away. Eventually people like John Aldridge. So it's very different sort of landscape to what happens in the mid-90s, where foreign players start flocking to the Premier League. It was the opposite of that, really. And I think, although it's interesting from the back end of the 80s, the early 80s, late 70s, as you'll probably know yourself, Phil, English football dominated Europe for a big period of time, mid-70s to mid-80s. We were the Premier League, really, weren't we, if you think about it on a European level?
Yeah, well, I mean, you discuss it in your book. From like 1977 to 1985, English clubs appeared in 8 of the 9 finals, so it was very much in the ascendancy. And as you say, when that European ban kicked in, there was a kind of it was like the inception of agricultural football again. You talk about it in your book, teams like the Wimbledon, who it was, some people would say that it was kick and rush. It wasn't quite as bad as that, but it was certainly direct football. And then you've got like Watford, who also played this kind of high intensity, kind of long ball percentage football, and the lesser known Cambridge United, who also played that way. But as you say, I mean, football heading into the 90s, we got a manager who at club level advocated that kind of football. So that made a incredible difference. But also, in the lead up, we, that football violence that you talked about led to the inception of the Taylor Report. And I seriously think, leading up to the 1990s, the government of that time wanted to strangle football. You know what I mean? I think, as you say, like World Cup 1990 was probably its saviour. Because it reignited that interest and that love of football. Like, as you say, it wasn't the best football, but it was an England team who you could get behind.
Yeah, I think there was a quote from Bobby Robson, I think, before the tournament. I think we maybe just had a friendly. He was kind of pleading with fans to behave themselves and enjoy themselves. I think he says something like, don't tarnish the name. We're here to enjoy ourselves, here to enjoy the football. And I think that was a very real thing at the time. And there's a quote in there talking about football being played or watched by, slum fans in slum stadiums. It was a slum sport. And that's the government of the day. Like, national newspaper demonizing the national game. And like, whatever people's opinions are about football, it is our national game.
It is,
it's our national game. We've massively developed it, took it around the world. It's been, in the country for 150 odd years, 160 odd years, even at the national level. It's our national game. And the fact that people who are ruling the country would say something like that, I think just shows you how apparent it was what people felt about football in the authorities at the time. And that Taylor Report probably did a lot of good, and it probably made a lot of the stadiums a much, much safer place than they were before that, especially for people who were coming in, like younger children or families who wanted to watch the game. But it did change football a great deal in terms of how it was received as a spectator sport, maybe to what it had been 10 or 20 years earlier.
Yeah. And in that first chapter of the book, you talk about the Big Five and how ITV kind of bought into the new kind of football renaissance of the late 80s. How did that come about, mate?
So I think what I found quite interesting researching this bit was how odd the TV situation was for football in the 1980s. How there wasn't always live coverage of matches. You might have got match of the day once a week, or Satan Greavesy on a Saturday afternoon who might preview some of the games, show a few highlights. I mean, obviously, it certainly wasn't like what it is today, but there was a lot of discussion in the mid-80s about like a Super League or breaking away or selling their own TV rights. Because remember, at the time, it was a deal for all the 92 clubs, not just the top league, the whole of the league, and they shared it out, which people might argue helped with competition. Possibly not 100% true, considering it was the same teams who dominated English football for decades and decades. It wasn't like there was a different league winner every year. Yes, we've maybe not had a Nottingham Forest or a Derby County since that point, but it was certainly the big clubs who dominated based on their revenue. So as it got towards the late 80s, I think people like David Dean and Martin Edwards started to realise, well, hang on a minute, we've got all the best players here. We're paying the most money on wages. We've got the biggest stadiums. Why aren't we on TV all the time? Why aren't we earning the big money? I think that's where someone like Greg Dyke, especially as a TV mogul, if you like, sort of saw the opportunity to latch onto that. And then when the FA produced the blueprint, which was, we need a top league that's got elite players, that's a smaller league, so we can develop our national team more. I think that's when they saw that little gap in the market and that little window of opportunity to say, right, we can get in here and we can make something of this. And I think one thing probably that runs through the book, and we'll probably touch on it as we go through, is that impact of commercialism and television rights that shape a lot of the football that comes after 1992.
Yeah, it certainly has changed. It's totally dissimilar to the game that I remember. I mean, now football has become part of the television schedule, hasn't it? It's one of the key components, whereas it just used to be a change from the norm. You used to see a live game once every 5-6 weeks. So it was, unless of course you went down and watched, which I did, but so completely different, Tom.
I think the famous one is the 1989 game when Arsenal beat Liverpool at Anfield 2-0.
Yeah. Mm.
And I think there's something like 5 minutes post-match reaction. I think they lift the trophy. I think they maybe interview Tony Adams, obviously, who was the captain. And then it was, okay, now it's time for the next lot of programming. And that was it. Like, there wasn't, when City won the league the other week, and there's 3 hours after the actual game where they're lifting the trophy and they're interviewing all the players on the pitch and then the reviewing part of the season. It just wasn't important. It wasn't important to TV schedules.
No, and it's funny you should allude to, like, I'm looking at your books on your shelf in the background, and you got Calcio, which a great read, but it also kind of shows you the scrutiny with which Italian football was kind of looked at during that time. They used to have like the before show, which was 2 hours, after show 2 hours, a Monday show that was also like 2 hours. A lot of their kind of TV schedule was already dedicated to football as a. And which sort of kind of brings me neatly onto, like, we talk, you talk in your book about Italian football, don't you? And the inception of it on our TV screens in the early 90s.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting one that it was already on TV. It was already on Sky the year before. I think they had League One at one point as well, with Martin Tyler commentating on some of the games. But the fact that, obviously, when Sky won the TV deal for the Premier League and they removed it effectively from terrestrial TV from a live point of view, the fact that the Italian TV rights became available at that point is just amazing. So obviously Gascoigne goes to Serie A in 92. Should have been 91.
Yeah.
But he got injured again. So they said, we'll still buy him at, I think it was about 2 or 3 million less they would have bought him for. And Channel 4 had a documentary pitched to them by a TV producer that was going to follow Gascoigne in Italy. They were going to follow him around, see what it was like, because he was a superstar. He was an absolute superstar, wasn't he, at that point? And following him around would have made an amazing documentary. And then they found that the Serie A TV rights were actually available at the time. And I think if I remember rightly, it was 1.2 million a season or 1.4 million a season, one of the two. And there was a headline on the front of When Saturday Comes at one point, Frank Rijkaard on. And you think the amount of value that Channel 4 got out of that league at that price. The first Premier League deal, I think, was 361 million for 4 years or 5 years or something. And they got that for like just over $1 million a season.
Yeah. It was
some of the best players in the world.
An absolute bargain, wasn't it? Yeah, and we had our like Andy Sintons and Carlton Palmers, and there was Andreas Bremer, and and Ruud Gullit, as you say. It was just an incredible lack of foresight by some of the big channels over here to not go down that avenue.
Yeah,
but what a great coup! What a great coup for
huge.
Channel 4.
And it was so different, though. It was so different to English football. And it was so different to what we knew, like you say with the TV. Their football was built into their life. It wasn't kind of we build our life around we do football on a weekend. It was like no, we're football fans, and the life is the bit underneath. Every part of their culture,
of culture is about football. Yeah.
And the stadiums look different, and the way the fans reacted to goals look different, and the way that they kind of behaved on the pitch was very different to what we would see. Similar at times, and it was definitely not as defensive as people would say, because if you're watching English football that time, I mean, it certainly wasn't a high-class, high-quality product compared to what you were seeing from a technical point of view in Italy. And there's loads of, I think it might be Ross Howard, I can't remember the name of his channel, but he's basically uploaded a ton of Football Italia from that early 90s period from Channel 4. And it's just a joy, like the nostalgia of it. That's probably how I grew up on football. I grew up on Brian Robson's Middlesbrough and Serie A on a Sunday. And then when we started buying players from, we bought Ravanelli and people like that, it was weird how then you could see after 92, where the Premier League was then becoming the place where some of these stars that we'd seen on Channel 4 from that point started to bleed into our game, like Zola, and then later on Benito Carbone, Paolo Di Canio, Casiraghi, Vialli. But it started there, and I feel like the way that football moved is really linked to that. And us as fans, how we appreciate footballers and football players, comes a lot from watching Gazza Football Italia and Football Italia on a Sunday and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, what those Italian players brought to the game was intense professionalism, didn't they?
Yeah.
We've been professional for a long, long time, but they brought a level of professionalism we hadn't seen before in this country. I was watching a game the other night, and one of my friends said to me, what do you think the difference between English football back then and Italian football was? And it still is to a certain degree. Italians will do anything to win. Whereas we've still got that kind of that residual fair play attitude. I know that's kind of become slightly different now, but there still seems to be in the British game, we still live by those principles. And harking back to the Euros, there was a time when Saka had gone beyond the fullback, and he just, in the last couple of minutes of extra time, and he just yanks him back. Is that the right way to play football? Is it the wrong way? It's the winning way, certainly, because they won. So, but that was sort of some of the stuff that was transposed over, along with all the good stuff. There was that little element of cynicism that came into the game too.
And I think that's what made the Premier League attractive, because you had, your English players who were doing it the right way, in inverted commas. Then you had all these, these Johnny foreigners who were coming over and taking all our money and all this kind of, when really, actually, I mean, we saw it at our club, actually. Ravanelli, although we hold him on high as this idol, his attitude to the club was awful, because we were still training for a little bit at Ayresome Park and ended up training at the prison on their football pitches. So there was no training ground. He said, this is a disgrace. He'd come from Juventus, like you say, that elite professionalism. And then he come to Middlesbrough, and it was like, well, there's no training ground. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't go to the gym because I can't. He was highly critical of the club at all levels. And what was interesting was, I think even still now, we've got one of the best training facilities in Europe.
Yeah.
Because we realised, actually, we need to modernise our game. I was watching something with Gary Neville and Steve Parish at Crystal Palace. their training facility is incredible for a mid-table Premier League team. If we look back at 92, 93, the top elite teams didn't have anywhere near that. Never mind a mid-table or lower mid-table team. So again, I think that's another reason why that the title, which people have given me a lot of criticism for, people who want to criticize you online for calling it, it should be the death of modern football or the death of football altogether. Well, actually, I'm not making the point that it's replaced anything. I'm making the point that it's developed what we have today. And some of that, like you say, that professionalism that came through a lot of those international players in the 90s who were saying, where's your training facilities? How am I supposed to perform at an elite level if I haven't got elite facilities? And I think that's where the game has moved. Massive amount of money that's coming to England has meant the teams can do that. But I think that's one of the things that starts around this time, that move towards that elite professionalism, not just where the best lads who can hold our drink Tuesday, Wednesday, train Thursday, Friday, play the weekend and repeat that. All the stories you hear about Arsenal, drinking culture in Liverpool and United, these were like the best teams in the country, living like me and you during the week. But on a weekend, they're elite football players.
Elite athletes. or supposedly so. Yeah, it's irritating when people kind of, they knock you for a title, because regardless of whether you like it or not, 1992 was the birth of modern football. Now, births aren't generally attractive to watch sometimes, you know what I mean? So that's, I don't see any validity in that, but there's certainly validity in the fact that it's where the modern era started from a football perspective. And there were slight nuances in the change of the laws, weren't there? I'm going to talk about the pass-back rule because I was directly affected by that in one game. I played in goal for about 25 years, and it was the first weekend of the back pass rule, and one of my fullbacks threw the ball back to me under pressure from an attacker, and I caught it in my hands as I had for however many 15, maybe 17 years beforehand. And the referee was like, straight away, back pass rule. And I was like, oh God. And the forward took the ball out of my hand, knocked it square and passed it into an empty net. And I was just like, so I was immediately affected by that pass back rule. But how do you think that had a kind of influence on how the game was played? We talk about the stream of great players coming in, but the rule changes, how did that affect the modern game?
I think it's interesting if you look at it from 2023 back to 1991, let's just say, so a year before the rule comes in, and you've got people like Edison or even Jason Steele at Brighton who are basically playing as the old-fashioned libero sweeper position for the team, whereas in 91, you threw the ball back to the keeper to take the pressure off. You passed it back to the keeper because you were winning 2-0 and there was 5 minutes to go. Or you had a 6'4" striker who was going to flick it on for your pacey winger or your pacey striker and hit it as high and as far as they could. Whereas now these goalkeepers are playing 30, 40, 50-yard passes to someone's chest or foot or into their run and setting up goals. And I think that's where we've got to because of the change in that rule. I think there was probably quite a lot of instances like you felt yourself, Phil, where someone had picked the ball up from a throw-in or just a pass back from a centre-back or a full-back, because it's that muscle memory for a lot of players, isn't it?
Yeah,
you've grown up from age 3, 4, 5 or whatever, and then you play organised games where you pass it back, it's part of your tactics, you pick it up, you kick it out. That was just part of football, wasn't it? If you were under the cosh with 10 minutes to go, what do? Right keeper, aim for the corner flags. Don't get out for a goal kick. Get out for a throw-in. Make sure you get out for a throw-in. Then we can press. Yeah, and that was like, let's get them under pressure. Get it in the mixer kind of thing. Get it up front. Whereas gradually it started to change in the sense that defenders then, you kind of felt like they had to go forward that little bit more because maybe the goalkeeper wasn't that good on the ball. Or they probably didn't want to do as much. There was quite a lot of criticism when I was reading about. I went back and looked at loads of like World Soccer magazines and Match and Shoot when Saturday comes from that time, because I wanted to sort of see what people thought of it. And there was quite a lot of criticism, especially in World Soccer, in the sense it would just make the game worse because the keepers would still be booting it out all the time because they couldn't pick it up. So instead of like starting a new attack, he'd just have to, hook it out for a throw in and hope for the best because they didn't quite know what it was going to look like on the pitch.
Oh, thinking that it would lead to less control of possession rather than more control. Yeah, it's a very blinkered way of looking at it. But I suppose when anything new comes in, you get that kind of period of doubt, don't you? And
you do, and football's such a reactive game as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like as soon as Pep came to England, everybody's keeper had to play the ball. Everybody's fullbacks had to come inside. It's that kind of thing where football always reacts to what seems to be successful. And this is one thing that is very reactive, but kind of didn't come from anyone. There wasn't really there were teams who, as keepers would pass it out or they'd roll the ball out. Like Liverpool did it quite a bit, didn't they, in the 80s, where Grobbelaar would get it, he'd roll it out to the centre-back who pass it to a midfielder. It doesn't really change that much for some of those teams. It was very much reacting to what they thought was, more boring football that had come out of Italia 90, as in, lots of passing back, lots of time wasting, the ball not being in play very much. Because even though English fans hold Italia 90 up as this bastion of hope, the football wasn't brilliant in that time. It was quite aggressive. It was quite foul heavy and very technical. And again, thinking about TV rights and how that comes into it, FIFA knew they probably couldn't sell that sort of product to the average family in the home. Whereas if they tried to do something that made it a little bit more exciting or with a bit more risk, then you're always going to be able to sell that sort of element, aren't you?
Of course. So I mean, that leads us quite snugly into what I'd like to talk about next, which is the advent of the Champions League. So, when did that process start? When to fully monetize European football, and who were the prominent figures behind the Star Ball era, the inception of the Champions League?
It's an interesting one because we talked a little bit about before with the European Cup, how you were the champions of your league. That was it. If you were champions of the league, you got in the European Cup. And then you could play anyone as you went through the tournament. And it was literally, if you were the European champion, you could have played anyone on the way. You could have played Malmo and Hamburg and someone else. Or you could have played Real Madrid, Juventus, and Rangers and got to the final. So it was purely that element of, it literally could be the luck of the draw.
Yeah, you used to get first round ties. I think the one when in 1987 when Napoli played Real Madrid. So you got in the first round, you got the champions of Italy playing against the champions of Spain, and one of them exits at that point. It was ridiculous, really. But also it had that kind of Russian roulette feel of football, didn't it?
It was almost like a pure competition. It was, you're all the champions. You're all just going to go in a hat, last man standing, and that's how you do it. And you say, you might get a bit of luck in the sense that you play someone who's a little bit weaker because they've got through, however they've done it. But then you had to, I mean, even in like other competitions where you've got teams like Aberdeen beating Real Madrid in the final, you know what I mean? There was a lot more parity probably with some of those other teams. But anyway, so with Berlusconi was the one. Berlusconi at Milan and Bernard Tapie at Marseille, they were the two who had loads of money and wanted to spend it on football.
Yeah.
And they knew that if they wanted to succeed and continue to be at a high level, they needed to win the domestic league and they needed to compete in European competition all the time. And they were very much, well, hang on a minute, I'm spending £40 million on players, or £30 million, because they were spending a fortune on players every summer. If I get knocked out in the European Cup in the first round, well, who am I? Who am Milan? If we're not on everybody's lips, if we're not the premier team in the country, and then the premier team on the continent as well. So they started to talk about a Super League, and there was rumours of Berlusconi trying to start Super Leagues, probably from whenever he started owning Milan, the late 80s, early 90s. They talked about European Super Leagues. So in classic UEFA fashion, they pretended not to bend to the big clubs, but actually just did anyway. So the first actual group stage competition was actually 91-92, and it was still called the European Cup. Yeah. But it was inverted, wasn't it? So instead of having a group stage and pure knockout, it was a knockout to qualify for the league. Then the league winners then got in the final. So it was that kind of weird element
funny you
to
should say that, Rob, because ironically that season, that very first season, Marseille, who were one of the great kind of contributors to the new era, they were knocked out by Sparta Prague in the knockout, which allowed Sparta Prague to join the group stage. So Bernard Tapie and all his kind of high kind of aspirations for Marseille, initially it didn't go according to plan, although later it sort of did.
Yeah, it's a very strange one, because basically what happened was it guaranteed the money. So if you knew you were in a little league and you played everybody twice, you might be guaranteed 6, 8, 10 games. Therefore, we'll pay you 1 million a match or 2 million a match. There's your 10 million. That's paid for your next big sign in the following summer. Then that cycle just continues, and then the Champions League branding comes in the following year, so 92, 93, but it's still kind of the European Champions Cup with a Champions League stage. And I think 94, 95 was the first one where it was, this is the Champions League, and that's what we call it, and that's everything about the competition is encompassed in that. But then obviously again with UEFA, you can only have one league winner from every league. So what do? You start letting second place in. Well, hang on a minute. We've got 5 good teams in Serie A. We want 3 places. But Holland have only really got, 1 or 2 teams. So let's have 1, but you've got to qualify. And what I think for UEFA was it spiraled out of control quite quickly after 92 because they tried to keep all of the big clubs happy. Because obviously if it was only a small league format for 8 teams at the end, probably going to be those 8 teams who got in it again and again and again. And if you don't expand it out, because basically at that time it was, if you owned a football club and you wanted to spend a load of money, go for it. And if that buys you into the Champions League or gets you back into the Champions League, you're going to have more money. So it just continues on that cycle. But for me, it's interesting when you look back, because I'm a Champions League kid. Like my football education, as I was saying before, Serie A, and it's Wednesday nights on ITV in the Champions League. Thinking about like, how can Gothenburg be this good against Manchester United, who are like the best team in England by a mile? How are they not beating Galatasaray? Like, who are Galatasaray? But then eventually, as you sort of grow into it, you understand the history of all these teams. And I think from a fan's point of view, it's literally my upbringing about how I understood about world football. From sort of a political point of view or like a structural point of view, I can completely understand why people think it's moved football too far in the other direction, because it has basically just catered to big clubs for the majority of the time.
I do think, I think that's why a lot of people are cynical about it. In my kind of experience, I think it's a lot of the leagues that were quite formidable during the kind of 70s and 80s, and now what you would think of as secondary leagues like Belgium and Holland, they produced some of the great sides of the 70s and 80s, and now they don't even advance beyond the kind of qualification stages. So it's the money that has kind of filtered down via the Champions League as kind of it's cut off certain countries who haven't got that depth of quality.
And the ultimate thing now is obviously when the Super League came out and all the fans went crazy, UEFA said we can't have a Super League, we can't let anyone break away. And from 24, 25, they've invented this new Champions League, haven't they? Like this big league, I think, is it 36 teams are going to be in the league or something like that, and everyone's going to play each other a certain amount of games or whatever it is, and then it's going to be knockouts. I think everybody is now guaranteed 10 games instead of 6. So if you get into the main draw, you've got 4 more games now, and that might work out at 2 or 3, £4 million a game or something like that. But again, it's those clubs who always get in and now getting more again.
More. I think it's going to eventually reach like kind of Brazilian Campeonato kind of levels where you're playing about 800 games a season in about 6 different leagues. So I mean, the book it covers that period, doesn't it, of huge transition in the game. And 1992 altered the direction of football immeasurably. So what's the legacy of the changes in the game that herald back to 1992, Rob?
Well, I think, as I was saying before about something like the back pass rule, it's changed the way the physical game is played. And I think that's important because I think if it had just been structural changes, that's kind of not really represented on the pitch. But I think having the back pass rule change at the same time, you can actually see a physical change in football. And I think you can see that over time in the evolution of the position of the goalkeeper, in that most fans now will say, he's a good goalkeeper, but he's not that good with his feet.
Yeah.
Whereas 30 years ago, actually not even 30 years ago, 20 years ago, you probably never would have even said that. You would have said, fantastic shot stopper, great on crosses, sign him up. Whereas now, if they can't pass, you probably don't want them.
It wasn't even a consideration during my day. It was just good basics and able to stop shots. That was it. Yeah.
And I think we're at a point where, and there's always change in football. There's always change in football, and it often comes in cycles. And I do think we've probably hit the end of the 92 cycle in the sense of people think there's too much football on TV. And there's been lots on Twitter actually about a group of men who have been arrested and jailed for setting up illegal streaming groups and selling the rights to people. And they've got one of them got 10 years in prison, I think. I think there's other things going on around what crimes they were involved in as well, to be honest. But what's quite interesting is in other countries, you can sign up for football for £20 a month, £25 a month, and you get all the top 5 leagues, every game, live all the time. Whereas like me, I'm a Middlesbrough fan who doesn't live in Middlesbrough. I can't watch Middlesbrough unless we're on Sky.
It's crazy, isn't it?
But someone who, is in Germany could be watching every I know we're not in the Premier League, but every Premier League game live at 3:00. Does that affect the Bundesliga attendances? No. For me, I don't think it would affect Premier League attendances if you could watch all the games live. Because I know if I lived in Middlesbrough and it was available on TV or the ground, I'd go to the ground.
Yeah.
Because I'm a football fan. I want to watch football and I love to watch it live. And I think that's the one big thing since 92, the TV element of football has been massive. It's funded the Premier League massively. It's got everybody to a higher level in terms of the stadiums, training grounds, the players they sign. But now I feel like that's the bit that we'll see a change in over the next 5 years, because lots of other sports, American sports, do it where you can watch. I think you can watch all the games outside where you live. So obviously it's still kind of trying to push you to go and watch your team, but you could still watch everybody else.
Yeah.
So that, there's loads of things I think they could do, but that's the thing for me that I think someone was saying to me, I think in the 1920s, they were talking about a European Super League and all this kind of stuff. So you can see it does sort of come back in again. But yeah, I think that that will be the thing. The TV, the back pass rule affecting the football on the pitch, and then the TV element that's affected everything really. But I think that's the bit that we'll see a new little change in the next 5 years, maybe, in terms of legacy.
So maybe a reduction in attendances and a greater flux of football on TV, perhaps.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what they did. I mean, if they just did a trial for a year and said, right, it's going to cost this amount of money per month to back the game, would attendance be affected? I mean, a lot of people, I think, are quite disrespectful to non-league football when they talk about football on TV, and they say, well, people will stop going to the non-league team and they'll watch football on TV. Why? That's being disrespectful to those non-league fans who support that club.
To me, mate, that's me directly. I support Solihull Moors. You know what I mean? I support. So I'll go to all the. I was I'm a Birmingham City fan in crisis, basically, because of the ownership issues that have rolled on for years. So for right or wrong, I refuse to put money in their particular pot. So for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been going to Solihull Moors games. But that's not to say that wouldn't change if we got new ownership. Yeah.
So, exactly. And I think people are underestimating people going to watch live football just because, there's quite in Liverpool, there's a few clubs like Marine who are doing quite well, who are like in North Liverpool, they got into the FA Cup against Tottenham. Just if Liverpool's games suddenly were live on TV at 3:00, yeah, you'd lose some of the fans, but they would still support Marine because that's the football team that they like to go and watch, And I think
of course.
that I'm not 100% sold on that argument all the time because I do think it's quite disrespectful to lower league clubs, especially because there's so many football clubs out there.
Yeah. Mate, it's been great to talk to you about this subject, but now we are going to move on to more painful and unpleasant territory.
The worst bit now.
Yeah, so we talked about it previously, so we're going to partake in a new feature which we ran with the first pod, which is called Worst Games Ever, where I ask you to talk about the 3 most horrendous performances, results, or both, by your beloved Middlesbrough. So today, Rob, it's your turn. So what is the first game that springs to mind when you think of those awful days at either Ayrsham or the Riverside?
As a Middlesbrough fan, there's a multitude of games that I can pick from. But what I'm going to try and do is I thought to myself, right, I'm just going to pick games that I've experienced live because I thought that's such a different feeling to other games that you might have seen, like the playoff defeat against Coventry. That was tough, but I wasn't there. You know what I mean? It's a different feeling. So the first one that I'm going to go for is 1997 FA Cup final against Chelsea. I toyed between this one or the Leicester Cup final and the Leicester replay. So a bit of context. My first year as a season ticket holder and my first year at secondary school. So I started to get loads of new mates, playing for the football team. We had Ravanelli, Janino and Emerson going to the games. My dad was like my age that I am now. So that's kind of like how I feel about football. He was the same. We went to away games and all sorts of stuff. So the Wembley final against Leicester, Emil Heskey equalised in the 119th minute. That was a killer.
I remember it, mate. I remember it well. Yeah.
Hillsborough replay. Steve Claridge scored a shinner because he only ever scored with his shin, and we lost that one. But then we'd just been relegated against Leeds, and then we had to go to an FA Cup final at Wembley against Chelsea. And when you think, after all of that, because we had the Chesterfield 3-3 as well, where they equalised in the last minute extra time.
Yeah.
We had all of that, the 3 points. You think, do you know what? Just go out and give a great performance. Just go out there and be the team that we know you can be. Because we'd had some really great games that season. We played some brilliant football, some awful football at the same time.
Honestly, that Middlesbrough team were absolutely fantastic. How they found themselves on the brink of relegation is like one of those perennial mysteries.
Yeah,
fabulous footballers, fabulous football. And still somehow contrive to get themselves relegated. And against Leeds on the last day of the season.
Of all teams as well to do it.
Absolute heartbreaker for Borough fans.
So that was just, you felt like it had all piled on. And we got to Wembley at about 9:15 in the morning. We'd literally left at like 6. We went from like where the pub where my dad and my family that used to drink in, they'd put a big coach on. Like 50 or 60 of us, so we went down, family members on there, and people that I knew from my dad and all that, and we watched the film on the way down. We got there at 9:15, and I'm 11 years old at this point, and my dad's like mid 30s, late 30s. So you can imagine what he was like at 9:30 in the morning. Right, we're going to the pub. Right, the pubs are open. Let's get in. So we went to get in at like 1:30, and my dad had this massive Union Jack flag that said Borough on it. But it had like a big, massive point on the top. So we got into a massive argument with a security guard outside Wembley. My dad was like, "This flag's been in my family for 40 years." And I'm like this, just standing like this, like, "What, Dad? What? Is just leave the flag." Anyway, we managed to get this flag in the ground. Get sat down. We had a much better view. We were behind the goal up high, whereas against Leicester, we'd been on the side. And I always thought Wembley was a bit of a dump, to be honest. The mystique around it, amazing. But as a stadium, horrible. Really uncomfortable. Anyway, get sat down about an hour before, going through the program, reading it all like that. Everyone else is sobering up. And then it starts. And then Roberto Di Matteo starts running down the middle of the pitch. And you know when you've got that feeling of just just get into him. Just hack him down. He's not going in that time. They're not going to book you in the first minute. Absolutely no chance, because you never did that in the 90s. You never got a booking, did you, in the first minute? Because anything went for that. And he kept running. I thought, come on, Borough, come on. Like, close him down. And he just lets that shot go from 25 yards. And Ben Roberts just, his arms open and the ball just flies through it. And after like 45 seconds, you just think, that's it.
It's not going to be our day.
I've got to sit through 90 minutes. I think, if I'm remembering rightly, I'm sure Ravanelli goes off after about 30 minutes.
Yeah, I think he got hamstring. Picked knocked, didn't he? Yeah, or a hamstring. Yeah.
Didn't find out till after that point. Him and Neil Cox had a fist fight in the restaurant. I think having breakfast or just about to get on the bus, because Rav was just slagging everybody off all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the first pretty low one. And when you're like 11-year-old, it's pretty bleak that when you've gone through that in like a 3-month period of time. But relegation was never a disaster back then.
No,
because the gap wasn't huge between First Division and Premier League. We go and sign Paul Merson, and we ended up with Andy Townsend, like Marco Branca, Neil Maddison, Alan Armstrong. We had a really, really good team and got straight back up. Whereas now it's kind of like, oh, we've lost 200 million quid. We're never coming back up. We've got to sell our squad. It wasn't like that then. So I think it was tempered a little bit by that. So that's the first one. The second one's another final. I picked 3 finals, by the way.
Oh, right. Okay.
So the next one's 2006 UEFA Cup final. Now, we'd come back unbelievably in a quarter-final and a semi-final, Basel and Steaua Bucharest, which, again, I still can't believe they actually happened.
Marco Macaroni!
Oh, it's like that. He came to us with such like potential, and he was going to be brilliant. He scored a lot of goals and then just did nothing. Nothing. And then all of a sudden, he became this like super sub, David Fairclough style, who scored these like late winners and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a great story because we got 9,000 tickets for the final. 9,000. I think at that point we had 24,000 season ticket holders, I think. Something like that. 26,000. That's another UEFA disgrace, isn't it? Putting football in stadiums that are not fit for purpose.
Of course.
But so what was happening was it was only like, I don't know, it was like a week before the final, 10 days before the final. My dad was working in Russia, I think, or in Korea. So we didn't know what was happening, if we were getting tickets or not. But what basically happened was the club would take the money out of your bank account before telling you had tickets.
Oh, it's okay.
So a few people clicked on. I think we were like the second band of season ticket holders. So we weren't like the original 5,000, but we were like the next block or whatever. So we knew we had a pretty good chance. And my dad rang from abroad and he's like, the money's gone. The money's gone.
You knew.
And we were like, what's going on? So then he flew back from Korea. I was in Sheffield, got the train up from Sheffield. We flew out in the morning at like 7 a.m. from Teesside Airport on the wrong plane. They were like, do you want to get on this plane? And we're like, where's it going? Frankfurt. Yeah, fine. If we get to Frankfurt, we'll somehow get to Eindhoven from there. We're supposed to be going to Stuttgart. Little did we know, me and my dad and my dad's mate who was coming with us, we were the last people on the plane. So, you know, like when you go on holiday and you're waiting for them last 4 people to get on, you've been sitting on the tarmac for 20 minutes.
Yeah,
so we literally got on the plane. We got daggers from every single Borough fan as we walking down. We were like, this isn't our plane. We were supposed to be on them 10 o'clock or whatever. So anyway, we get to Frankfurt and we just jumped on a coach and we were like, we just got to get to Eindhoven somehow. Just get on this bus and we'll get there. Get to the square at 9:30 again in the morning. I don't know what it is with us getting to finals early. Get to the final like 9:30 in the morning. Beaming hot sunshine. Unbelievable day. And I said to my dad, I said, I'm not drinking today. I said, we might never, ever get to a European Cup final again. Ever.
Yeah.
I said, I just want to be here and enjoy it and be with your mates and all. So he ignored that, and all of his mates did, and everyone else who was a Borough fan did. So by about midday, everyone was like asleep, getting sunburns, like in the square at Eindhoven. Then the Sevilla fans rock up at 6 o'clock at night. I think it was 9 o'clock kickoff, like local time. So they arrive at like 6 and they are bouncing. or the noise out of them because they're fresh. They've just flown in, they're fresh, and all our Borough fans are kind of flat. And that's what the game was like.
Yeah.
Really flat. McLaren had already said he was going to England, which a bit like Bobby Robson before Italian 90. He'd already said he was going, I think, before the tournament, hadn't he?
Mm.
But we knew McLaren was going, so you already were thinking, is he going to be 100%? Is he right for this? Is he actually going to be in the zone for it? What are we going to do? To be honest, I didn't know a lot about that Sevilla team at the time.
No.
I knew they were a good side, and obviously it's turned out since then they've just won copious amounts of Europa Leagues, basically since that point, really.
That was their first one, wasn't it? And then they've become the most crowned Europa League team,
which is amazing because in Spanish football they were probably similar to Borough were at the time in England, like a decent top half of the table side with a few stars, a few decent players, but they had like Dani Alves, Jesus Navas, Saviola, Canute. There's some really, really good players.
Some real talent,
yeah, massive. We had Hasselbank, Viduka, Southgate, Boateng, Rockenbach. We had some really good players at the time. But when their first goal went in, you thought, well, we've come back before. We've come back. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And the atmosphere was really flat. It was really dry. Everyone was hungover already because they've been drinking for 12 hours. And that's a massive thing for a final. Everybody's got to be there. Everyone's got to be up for it.
Yeah.
We're watching it from behind a mesh fence.
Oh, right.
PSV Stadium had this weird mesh, these posts everywhere, so you could barely see the game properly. And then Viduka has a shot, the keeper saves, and he has another one where he gets elbowed in the back, goes down, no pen, play on. And we're just like, it felt, there's a saying of like typical Borough. So you think everything's going fine, and you go, typical Borough. That's
yeah.
You know what I mean? And then the 4-0. It wasn't a 4-0 game.
No,
we had a load of strikers on, put loads of attackers on, as he'd done in the other rounds, and they just ripped us apart that last 20 minutes. But that was heartbreaking. That was really heartbreaking because you never felt you were going to get there, but nobody can tell you they were happy to be there. Because once you're there, you want to win. Even though beforehand you were like, wouldn't it be amazing if we got to a UEFA Cup final? God, that'd be incredible. Like 10 years after or 11 years after moving to the Riverside, which is a massive jump from there to there, from like Ayresome Park to your final. But then when you are there, it's just awful. It's horrible.
I'll subscribe to losing in finals. I went to the Solihull Moors Grimsby one last year, and throughout the game, like before we got there, we were on a vein of form. We hadn't lost for 15 games, and we were playing some fantastic football. And on the day, we just didn't turn up. Horror. And you just think, before we went there, I was like, we're going to win this. We're the best side. We're the best, one of the best sides in the league. We play the best football. We'd already beaten Grimsby twice in the league that season. And on the day, it was just a bit. You knew within about 10 minutes you didn't start right. The passing was all wrong, and although we only lost narrowly, it was because the performance was all wrong. And you just never hit the heights that you did, which sounds a bit like the Middlesbrough one. Although I do remember that game, and at 1-0, Middlesbrough had about 2 or 3 chances to draw level, and just didn't take them. And then, as you say, just because you were chasing the game, that's when it started to get further and further away.
And that's the ruthlessness of finals, isn't it? You just got to win. Yeah. Like we were saying before about the Italian players, just win.
Yeah.
It literally does not matter how you do it. You just got to get it over the line. I think my third one, is going to echo exactly what you've just said about a playoff final there. So it's Norwich playoff final, 2014-15. So it's Aitor Karanka's first full season in charge. We were really solid, but we were better going forward than we were when we got promoted, I think. We had Patrick Bamford at like 21-year-old when he was scoring for fun. Lee Tomlin, who was a proper classic Football League, barrel-chested playmaker. Ben Gibson was sort of coming of age. We had a really good team. So again, get to Wembley, not as early this time, but my dad was working in London at that point. So we'd been out to like a Middlesbrough supporters South day out. Then we went to Trafalgar Square the next day, Me and my dad and his mate ended up drinking vodka and cokes out of champagne flutes because they had no cups left in the Tesco Express on Trafalgar Square. There's no cups left. So right, get a couple of bottles of vodka, get a couple of bottles of coke, and just whatever vessel they've got. And there's us, like three blokes from Borough drinking these, like 75% vodka, 25% coke.
Yeah,
and it was the atmosphere was unbelievable, but it felt like you'd already won.
Yeah.
It felt like you were celebrating like you'd won.
Yeah, that's exactly how it felt when we walked into the stadium. It was like it was so stick on that we were going to win that final, and it just didn't happen.
And it's that frustrating. So we played Norwich, who had a good team. Alex Neil was manager. They had a good team. We'd beaten them twice. We beat them easily at the Riverside, and we'd beat them about a month before at Carrow Road. And it was that, I think, that cost us. Similar to the Leicester final in 97, we played at Filbert Street and beat them 3-1 in one of our best ever performances. And it almost kept us up. So what they did was, after that game, they put Pontus Kamark on Juninho for 120 minutes.
Yeah.
And he couldn't move. And the one time he got free, he set Ravanelli up to score. But in the league game, he just run rampant. He'd absolutely destroyed them. So it was interesting. So the Norwich game starts. They hit the bar after 7 minutes. We literally, off the transition, hit the bar. So like after 8 minutes. After 10 minutes, Danny Ayala, who was a really reliable defender that had a bit of a mistake in him, fell over the ball. Cameron Jerome, who's the worst player to score against you because he always scores, doesn't he?
Yeah.
How was Cameron Jerome scored? But anyway, he broke through and he scored. He got a horrible one past the keeper at like the near post. And no one, you just like typical Borough. We just hit the bar. We just nearly scored. One of our best defenders has just give the ball away, and they've scored 4, 5, 6 minutes. I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah,
it was definitely within 20 minutes. Nathan Redmond gets the ball, edge of the box, goal. Now that Karanka team was really well known in his spell that if we went behind, we never came back. Like you just never came back. But on the flip side, if we scored first, I think we won like 95% of the games.
Oh, right.
Because we just knew, because he was Mourinho's assistant at Real Madrid. So it was that kind of thing of, when we're winning, we'll do anything we can to win.
Yeah.
Whereas if we went behind, it was like, we didn't like that adversity. We weren't built to come back. And then we just had to sit there for like 75 minutes. Because we knew 2-0 down after 20. We knew we weren't even going to get a goal. We just knew it. And in that stadium, it was probably the best from a fan point of view. One half was all red and the other half was all yellow. And like from that point of view, it just looked like such a real big occasion, like a big football match. And I'm not one for leaving. I never left a match early. Never ever left a game early. So I thought, what's the point? You're here to watch the fight till the final whistle, so you stay. But we stayed for like Norwich celebrating. Because I was a bit like, you just got to take in all of the things that have happened at that point. Because I wouldn't have wanted to be like stomping out of the ground complaining to my friend.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't do this. We didn't do that. It's like, no, we got beat and they've won. And they were better than us on the day. And, they've got up. The following season, we got promoted, which kind of made that a bit different. But that felt like such another kind of like deflating moment in a big final. And I feel like if we'd have beat Coventry and got to the final against Luton, you just feel like it would have happened again.
Oh, mate. I was just about to say, they're being a fan of like Birmingham City, and I think being a fan of Middlesbrough, it's like a parallel,
Yeah.
You're always anticipating that something's going to go wrong, and it invariably does.
Yeah.
I think it's just the and I don't just think it's Borough and Blues. I think that's like 80% of football fans.
Yeah.
We spend most of our life in abject misery.
And I think what you could argue possibly about 92 is football is now against that 80% more than ever.
Yeah. Definitely,
you know what I mean?
Definitely, yeah.
Because in the past you would have had teams making FA Cup runs to the quarterfinals from, the second division, or you would have had different teams getting in. yes, the big teams probably still would have won because Liverpool had the best players, and Everton and Man U and Tottenham and Arsenal, whatever. But you still had that little bit of hope. Like for fans of like Birmingham, for Borough, even someone like Burnley to a certain extent. I know they've been in the Premier League for a little bit longer. Like Brighton, have done amazingly well, but they have to work so hard to get everything right to finish 6th.
Yeah.
Liverpool can have, if the people I know around here have had a bad season and finish 5th.
Yeah.
Brighton have had to get everything right, every signing from all corners of the globe, hope that it works out perfectly, hope that they can keep them for 2 years and not get sold off straight away to finish 6th. And I think as a Borough fan, I would have loved to have got promoted to the Premier League, obviously, because you've got more access. You're on Sky, you're on the Fantasy Football League app. You know what I mean? It's the daft little stuff. You're in the sticker book. But really, would I have wanted to watch us get 30 points? Probably struggle all season. And then rebuild again, and then hope to build again. Like Fulham have had a brilliant season this season, haven't they?
Yeah,
but it's taken them like 4 years of going up, down, buy this player, buy that player. It's that. How long does that last? And I think that's what we were probably spoiled actually thinking about Borough in the 90s and early 2000s, but really took it for granted.
Yeah.
Like those European games where there's like 18,000 in the crowd.
Yeah.
They might never come back.
I know, yeah. But again, like you say, what's the point playing attritional football when you're in the top level? It's just you got to go for it, which is what teams like Fulham have done. And like post 92, like you say, it was a little bbit more of an egalitarian area because era of time, because in 86 you had like Oxford winning the League Cup, 87 Coventry winning the FA Cup, 88 Wimbledon, and Luton winning the 2 domestic, and it just, that doesn't happen anymore. So 1992 was that kind of new rebirth of the modern game, wasn't it? So anyway, so Rob, the book's been out for a few months now.
Yeah.
And as I said before, I've read it, and it's really great kind of concise text. It gets straight to the kind of story, and it really captures the essence of those transitional times. So how's it been received, mate?
Do you know what? I've had lots of positives, lots of really good feedback from people and messages online. I've done a few different podcasts and interviews where people have said they've really enjoyed it. And do you know what? I wanted to write a book that I'm not a professional writer. You know what I mean? It's what I do as a hobby. But I wanted to write something that I felt like was really accessible to people. I didn't want people to get bogged down in it. And that's kind of why I've structured it in a way that each chapter's like a different little section of 92. So, you might read it and then dip back in to read it in 6 months' time, but just read about the Champions League or just read about the back pass rule. Or I like reading those dense books that have got loads of information and they're huge. And I've got one that The Ball is Round by David Goldblatt, which is like, it's just got everything in it. It's incredible.
Fantastic author, mate. Fantastic.
Yeah, he's amazing. But I just wanted to write something that you pick up, you buy it off, Amazon or Pitch Publishing or wherever you get it from, and you enjoy it over a couple of weeks, and you might dip back into it in a couple of years' time or read a chapter here and there, because I feel like that's what's appealing about reading about football. And I think that's where, like, there's so many good books that are just about really small subjects.
Yeah.
Really get into for a bit. And that was kind of what I tried to do with that. And do you know what? It's quite mad, actually. I think at one point, it was like top 10 in the football charts for Amazon. You know what I mean? And I think 8 of them are those kids ones that are about, Salah, Haaland, Ronaldo, and Messi.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean? They're everywhere. And I mean, I work in a school, so all the
Me
kids.
too, yeah. Them.
You love them, absolutely love them, which is great.
Yeah.
So that was great. And it's kind of a weird feeling, because when you write something, I'm sat on my laptop reading magazines and books and typing stuff, and then all of a sudden, like, people can read it. I think that's probably the bit that is quite odd, because people then will think, well, I don't agree with that, or that's not written very well, or whatever. You know what I mean? That's quite a weird part of it, and especially because some people who comment on like Twitter and stuff like that, which is well within the rights, they disagree with the whole concept of the book. And you're a bit like, well, maybe just read it, and then if you still disagree, fair enough. But at least see what it says. But yeah, it's been really positive, and I really appreciate that. And I think I am writing another one at the minute, and it's made me want to do another one. You know what I mean? I think that can only be a positive, really.
Mate, well, I look forward to seeing what that new one's about. Anyway, so you can get it on Amazon. You can get it in your bookshops. I was in Bishop Stortford the other week, and it was on the. I'll text that to you know. It was on the shelf there. It gave me great joy to see somebody who I knew who we'd worked together to see their book on the shelf. So long may that reign, mate. And I'm sure. It's a difficult process writing a book. I understand that, but I'm sure it's going to be an interesting subject, this one too, isn't it? So anyway, great. So thanks, Rob. It's been great you being the guest this week. So join us next week on Football Geeks for more unadulterated football chat. So until then, see you next time. All the best.